Now let's, and then of course I talked to you about the quick site as well. So let's go to the RDS. So if you want to start a database, you come to the Amazon RDS dashboard, right? So in this dashboard, you will see all of the databases that you are running, that if it's running in the cluster. So this is database instance 3 out of 40, allocated storage, right? DB cluster. So these are the allowed, right? So, and then how many snapshots I have, how many manual I've taken, automated is one, recent events, all the details are provided over here, right? So if I go and click on database instances, for example, this database I just created like maybe a few minutes ago, right? Before this session started, because I wanted to walk you guys through, right? So this was a MariaDB. Now it's available. I created on DB M5 X large, right? Because I just started it with the production database. And there are many things that you can do, right? If I go and click on it, you can see the summary. This is the identifier. So if you want to connect to your API, you would need that information, right? And it is installed on the CA Central 1A, exactly physically where it is, we don't know, but you can tell, okay, it says CA Canada Central 1A. The size, the class of the database, it's a DB M5X large. You can modify, change up or down. The engine that is running is a MariaDB. There are no sessions, obviously, right? But if you click on these sessions, it would actually give you more details on the connections, top SQLs, and database load. It gives you a lot of relevant information that you really need in order to find out exactly how your database is performing. So if I go back here, then there is the connectivity and security. So this is the database endpoint, and this is the port it's running on. So if you want your database to be connected, let's say, in my case, when I was showing you the architecture of my data warehouse, the Redshift, the data needs to be pulled from it, for example, right? So you want to synchronize it, then you would need this endpoint, right? So this whole URL, and you need to configure it into data warehouse and start pulling the data. So this is the endpoint, or if you want to actually have an externally application that needs to talk to it, then obviously you would need to copy paste this and use this in your API, the SDK, in order to connect the database, okay? Networking. The database, the RDS, you need to specify which virtual private cloud you need to install this database in. So this is by default, I've selected AWS class, which is the session we are doing. So, but you can have it in a separate VPC. You can have a very secure VPC. So if you remember my other diagram that I showed earlier, you have your private subnet, you have your public subnet. Just make sure that you understand that. Let me bring that slide back again, just as a refresher. There we go. Move it here. So if you notice that this is the database, right? So right now, this is sitting inside of this VPC 10.0.0.0/16. So if you want to have a separate VPC, which hosts multiple forms of database, clusters of database, you may want to probably have separate VPC, which is called database VPC, for example. And in that VPC, you can make it more secure by having a private subnet. And in that subnet, you can host your RDS, right? This way you can remove the public subnet and make it more secure. So this is what's happening here. So it's just the default VPC that I have selected. This is the subnet group. I just talked about that, right? And if you want to have some certificates installed on the database, you can do that. Security roles, security group, sorry. So which security group? This is if you were in my last session, we talked about the security groups. So you can allow or disallow certain IP to access your database. So if you want to allow everything to talk to it, then you can have 000.0/0, and that security group can be actually associated with your database. Or if you want to make it much more secure and say, okay, specifically this port is allowed and this IP address is allowed, you can specify a database security group, for example, and specify the IP address in that security group, database security group, and just that security group would be tied with this database, and nothing else would be able to access it. These are the things that you need to know and understand when you want to architect your infrastructure, and also while you're making your infrastructure secure. Replication. So this is the replication database 2, right? So it is actually getting the replicated, right? So let me just go here and look at some of the actions. So you can go ahead and stop this database. You can reboot this database box. You can delete it. You can create a read replica or take a snapshot and restore to a point in time, right? So for example, if you want to create a read replica, right? So that read replica is nothing but a copy or clone of this production database called database 2. The advantage of this creating a read replica is you can have that read replica serve a reporting request, right? So if somebody is asking different information a lot of time, you don't want to hit your production database, right? You would, as a good architecture, what you want to do is actually have a read replica, which is basically aligned with your production database. However, it is having all the data that is actually inserted and modified in your production database, but allow this read replica to serve off of all the reports, right, and queries. It's only read, hence read replica. Cannot modify that because it's not a two-way sync. There are databases which allow master, replicas and stuff like that in MySQL, but then you have to configure it yourself. In this read replica, you are just passing the data and allowing it just to read. You can have multiple read replicas. You can also have, based on the region, the availability zone, you can say, okay, well, I'll create this in this region, for example, because my reports requesting users are from a different region, for example, right? So if you have Asia Pac, right, or maybe South Asia, where people are requesting a lot of reports, what you do is basically you set that read replica in that region, and that data is basically synchronized between your production database and read replica. This way, the folks who are requesting the report from, let's say, Asia Pac, for example, they will get a less latency, and they won't be coming and hitting your main production database. I just click on create read replica. When you come here, you will see different options. You're creating a read replica instance from a source database instance. This new database instance will have the source database instances DB security group and DB parameter group. So everything is inherited. That's what's saying. So you whatever security group, like I said earlier, if you want to have very specific IP address blocked or allowed, certain ports allowed or blocked, then you may want to probably set a specific security group and associated with that, and within that VPC. So this is inheriting all of that information from the production database that you're running the read replica from. DB instance class. So if you go here, there are a bunch of databases options, database box options that you have, right? You could have a DB2 T2 micro, right, which is only 1 GB RAM, 1 CPU, right, all the way to DB M5X, M5.24X large with 96 virtual CPUs and 384 GB. So again, if you're running a very large enterprise applications and need a really heavy box, then you may want to probably consider this, right? But again, price, right? So it's going to be very expensive. Multi-AZ specifies if the database instance should have a standby deployed in another availability zone or not. So within read replica, you can probably have another database which can be actually copied and cloned of your read replica. You can say yes or no, right? So if you do say yes, then it's going to create another copy of that and it's going to start replicating there as well. Storage type, if you guys have attended my last session on the storage, then you would know there are different types of storage: general purpose, SSD, provision, IO ops, and then magnetic, right? So magnetic is very slow. Provision is fairly decent. General is a little bit slow, right? You can leave it as an provision. I think this is 10,000 IO ops, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. Yeah. So you can specify how the throughput is it go up or down, right? Storage and IOPS impact instant performance until operation complete. So let's leave that as it is.